Now, Michael has agreed to come on the show today, and he wanted to talk about his latest work, which is called The Female Illuminati. And you will find that on the front page of michaeltsarion.com right now, a graphic which shows the Female Illuminati, the Sisterhood of Death Exposed. So, without any further ado, I'm going to bring Michael Tsarion on. Hello, Michael, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Ted. Thanks for the invitation. It's nice to be on.
Absolutely. I have been wanting to have you as a guest for a long time, and it was only through some, I would say, good and fortuitous luck that we've been able to hook up, because you are so busy doing tours and giving seminars and lectures in various places. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to make yourself available. There are a lot of people who are very interested in what you have to say, and I'm sure that you have found this in your travels, that people are hungry for the kind of knowledge that you bring forward.
Well, more so now. The greatest base, both for teachers in this field and audiences in the Americas, have always been traditionally a large demographic of people who are very savvy. I mean, I would say quite in depth. After all, that includes the 9/11 tragedy that then woke up a lot more people. So it's always been America's the main base. Not so much Britain, Europe, and elsewhere, but now slowly it's starting to happen gradually, and that's why I've been given invitations. We did talks in London, which were very good, very nice to do that, and then the big tour in Australia, and we're thinking of going back to do another one again in that area. And it's a little bit special for me because they're also moving up to speed also with the new stuff. It's not just that they want you to come and talk about the things that you did 10, 15 years ago. That's always interesting, of course, but once you put out a lot of interviews and once you put out a lot of web stream and books and you've sort of covered that, you want to move on, and it's very important that your audience is also keeping up to speed. So I've seen that happen as well, which is an extra sort of bonus, that they're up to speed with the latest things that I'm doing, which is great.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that I find really interesting about your work, Michael, and perhaps you'll have a chance to talk about that today, is that you bring in a deep analysis and a psychological analysis into the field by looking at philosophers and psychologists and breaking down the mechanics of how all of this stuff works within the psyche of humans. And I think a lot of people miss that entire avenue of this particular research.
Yes, they do, and they do even worse than that. They take a lot of dead ends. They miss out on the core psychology, as you say, and a certain amount of even the philosophy, and they go into other areas that are, I'm not saying that those areas aren't interesting, but if you tunnel vision with this subject, I mean, we are, as you said in the introduction, talking about alternative research, conspiracy, a certain amount of occult subject matter. The last thing that you want to do is start looking at with the narrow mentality that is already the bane in the academic world. That's what's bringing that world to a grinding halt. That's what people are frustrated and fed up with. Well, what the hell do we want to repeat the problem over here in this alternative movement? Also, the way that we look at the subject matter must also be alternative. And that means a constellation, a synthesis, a stepping close to the canvas and then pulling back. I've always maintained that this is a very complex area. People with degrees coming out of universities haven't the faintest idea that there's an unofficial history. Their teachers don't have an idea. And these are individuals who, because they've got this piece of paper from some university, actually imagine they know anything about history, are usually very pompous and self-righteous and opinionated. And none of this is of any use. We do get that, of course, even within this movement. People are not as open-minded as one would wish. But you certainly get it in the academic world. And therefore, they're incapable of blending together science, meta-science, occultism, mystery religions, as you said, the symbolism. This is why this stuff distinguishes the alternative research community. It distinguishes the open-mindedness, the ability to be able to take pieces from everywhere and find the inherent. It's actually how the brain works anyway. So you're doing something that's a lot more organically true. And and of course, not to mention the fact that, as I've mentioned many times before, you actually are on the scent of a very elusive and extremely cunning predator who's made sure to cover their tracks. They've left many loopholes, but they're a sinister breed who have made sure that you're not going to find it so easy to, you know, discover their criminal history. So you have to go. It's not, they haven't just written it down.
I agree, and I think that when it comes to history, you know, every day I'm convinced more and more that history, as we've been taught, as is officially known, is bunk. And you will not find that kind of mentality out of traditional learning institutions or amongst the so-called experts in the field. They think that once something is published within an academic journal or in a book somewhere, that it's a fact and it's widely known and accepted. But I'm honest enough to know and agree and say that I really don't know all that much about what the true history of this world, of mankind, of even this country is. And every day I'm reminded of it a little bit more.
The more that you, yes, but hooking on to what you just said, that you know that it's largely bunk, is in itself a massive step forward. So even though a person may be a little humbled by the fact that they, you know, have to do a lot of homework or whatever, in a way that's, you know, necessary, but it's secondary to the idea that you finally have come, or the human race has come to the point where they are now aware that the official establishment line, and I don't care what it is, the story of the Civil War, or the War of Independence, slavery, the story of Britain, the story of the Boer War or the Nazi period, I don't care what it is. Once people, which is happening now, are becoming very, very disenchanted, and they're gaining slowly a skill to be able to see the inconsistencies. This is a skill I've had all my life, and I'm glad to see now people are starting to notice that when they watch some show, or they listen to a teacher at school, or they open an official book, they are more quickly than ever before in history, able to spot the inconsistencies. This doesn't ring true, or this guy says one thing on one page and then he's sort of dramatically contradicting himself on the other page. And what's going on here? Or people will just be feeling disenchanted with the incredible hubris, you know, because you talk about some academic work there. What happens if one of those academic books happens actually you hit the bestseller tables? You know, look at the hubris, look at the arrogance that this paradigm, where it's a Darwinian or, you know, medical or whatever, the official line, you know, then these officialdoms, they're not just writing their books in a university and have it published. They have the entire media network. They've got every radio show, every mainstream radio show and television program and documentaries and million-dollar budgets to go now and bamboozle people, befuddle the hell out of people with millions of dollars behind it of all these spurious lies about individuals, about movements, about events of history, and so on. And so, yes, deconstructing that is a monumental work that is very difficult to do, and one needs to be ready to meet a lot of world resistance. There's me talking about the occult history of Ireland. Have you any idea what that causes you when you try to debunk the official history that's been handed to every school kid there about the Catholic and Protestant conflict, the IRA, or anything like that, just within an Irish context, trying to teach people the difference. You know, there's another history of Ireland that goes on, not just in ancient times, but in modern times. A sinister type of a history, etiology, is incredibly, you know, difficult because it opens you to so much flack from other people, let alone Americans who are trying to do the same thing about the goings-on in their land.
And you have said earlier that you had noticed that in the United States it seems like there is more of an impetus, a push forward into this realm, an acceptance of the bunk of history and a desire to move forward into gaining knowledge and trying to make a step ahead and get out of the traps that we've been put into over the years. Is that something that you've seen all along, that the United States has been more inclined to be accepting of this new material and of breaking the paradigms that have enslaved us, or is that something also a new phenomenon?
Oh, it's not new, it's old. Even if you scroll back to my earliest interviews, when I first started getting a little notoriety, you know, I mentioned that I was very surprised, and I got some interviews with Patrick Bailey that are online, and people can see those, and I'm even mentioning it then because I was noticing it. And by the way, I wouldn't have even started had it been not the case. You see, my sort of move towards being more publicly known was not personal choice. This was by meeting the individuals in the American context who already had been seasoned in all of this, and they liked what I was talking about. At that time, it was more about the Irish. It was sort of like a Zachariah Sitchin take on what the Irish legends had to say about the alien visitation and what have you. They loved this thesis, and I got all of this attention from them. Not something I was looking to. Not only that, but as even on the street level, like catching the bus to go to work. I would meet these VA veterans, old guys, who've been shunned to the side by society, and they'd come over to me at the bus stop or whatever, sitting on the bus, hey, and they pull out a $1 bill and go, it's all about this, man. Do you know what this is all about? It's a conspiracy, And it was through things like that. And then a few other, this was, of course, around about the time of the first Desert Storm. So there was a lot of disgruntlement in the streets, and there was a lot of little periodicals and little pamphlets being put out and what have you. And there were these organizations, there were underground organizations. So it was all there. There's barely any of that even today in England. It doesn't mean that there's not always a little tiny small subculture who's got sort of an inkling into some of this. There are such people. But it's vaster in America, and that comes from the original free thought that started America, the distrust of oligarchy, the need to maintain freedom, and some of the greater aspirations of the founding fathers of America. And I don't just mean the more mainstream ones. I mean like the Thomas Paines and the Burkes, some of the great thinkers. America's had its fair share, and a great love for actual freedom and a distaste of sovereignty, the sovereigns interfering under any pretext. Now, as we know, that's slipping. That's been slipping gradually. But at the heart of the American psyche is a tremendous spirit of rebellion and revolution that's been slowly eaten away and chipped away through the affluence and through the amnesia and through the media. But yeah, then you have this whole subculture of the G. Edward Griffins and the Eustace Mullinses and even the John Colemans and the Ralph Eppersons, you see, and there's so many great writers there who've basically said it all, actually. So my work has been to take their work further, to get into more nuances, to delve more deeply into stuff that they've already set the groundwork, and by far, with a few exceptions, and those exceptions may include somebody like, say, Yuri Lina from Sweden. He's originally Russian. There are a few names that most people don't know. They're very important writers in Europe. But by far, all of the original conspiracy writers, and this goes back to Myron Fagan and Reverend Fahey, and there's so many great historical figures, even Charles Lindbergh Jr. There are many, many people. Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator, his father was on radio back in years gone by in the 1940s and 50s, on radio, actually publicly exposing the conspiracy. You've had presidents who've done it. You've had governors who've done it. You have a whole slew of military people, lieutenant colonels and captains of the army, like William Guy Carr and many others who've written volumes upon volumes. You've got Eustace Mullins. You've got Ezra Pound. You've got a huge group of people that are into this. So when I got to the States and was slowly introduced to this through the Nord Davises and Lyndon LaRouche and also the Bo Greitz, Lieutenant James Bo Greitz and Bob Dean, and I was just thrown into the middle of all of this, and it was wonderful. So I wouldn't even be doing the work that I'm doing now without having first been not only introduced to these people, but also welcomed by many of them as well, right across the board. So yeah, America is head and shoulders above the rest of the world when it comes to this. The rest of the world's got a lot of work to do to catch up.
Well, that's actually heartening to hear that, and it's also very good to have an international perspective, because a lot of people here in the United States really have no idea what's going on around the world in other countries, other than what the mainstream news has to tell them, and occasionally a little bit from alternative media as well. But I'm afraid that some of the alternative media is itself being capitulated to some of the same kinds of things that have taken over the mainstream media. And a lot of the alternative research community is also succumbing to some of the forces that have largely made our media completely inept and complacent, and also fostering the idea of continuing the lie of the oligarchy that is actually running everything.
That's right. But see, again, let's look at it. Let's look at it even outside of a conspiracy point of view. It is in America that you have a Louis Farrakhan, freak as he is, and crap that he talks. At least he's free enough in America to get up and say it. On the other side, you got David Duke. He's an American. You've got Lincoln Rockwell. So start looking at all the great names of the great people who've tried to change the world, They're American. The very fact that they are there and they have the voice there. Webster Tarpley, one of the most greatest thinkers in the conspiracy movement, appears even on, I think he's even appeared on O'Reilly, for goodness sake. Now, what is the chance of a type of person like Webster Tarpley turning up on the BBC to talk about the Rothschilds? Absolutely no way. Yet on Alex, and then you have an Alex Jones. He's the classic one that everyone will know about. I mean, people may like him, maybe they don't. But guess what? He also is an American. He can stand up with a bullhorn in front of the Bilderberger headquarters and go, "Get thee hence. We're on to you." Wait, and then he even comes to Trafalgar Square and Marble Arch to do it. I've waited a whole lifetime to see any English punk get up and do the same thing. It takes an American to come and show them what to do. It takes an American to stand up in front of his own government with the guts to say, "Here, we're on to your gig here. We're not going to tolerate this." You see, so people forget this. And of course, you are right. It has gone downhill. It's not that these great minds are on every day on these great shows. They should be more. And then you have also these people's champions, the false ones, in to pretend that they're conspiratorial or that they're, looking into the darker matters. When in fact, of course, they're not. They're just agents, provocateurs to give the Americans now the illusion. And that's why podcasts like yours have become the place to go, not the mainstream. So, yes, that has been worrisome that the mainstream people have been, but they got rid of them all. The Morton Downey Jr.'s and all of these other people that used to have great guests on, and in the early even days of the Donahues, you see, that's all been sanitized. They won't allow it now. They won't allow any voice on in any channel, whether it's cable access or certainly not PBS, except when it serves their other agenda, except when they want some sort of pop icon rebel type, these Bono types as I refer to them, to lead the people down because it serves a higher agenda. The real McCoy, and certainly people like myself, is hardly ever going to be dealt with by the mainstream media, and that's perfectly all right by me. That just means that we've now got a challenge to do it ourselves. Create our own radio shows and podcasts and films and movies and documentaries and what have you, which I've been trying to do in my own small way, and just keep on going with the research. It has to be out of love of the research that's the most important motivation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I do what I do, because I am trying to get to the bottom of some very nasty business accompanied with all of the different areas of research that you have studied. And by doing this show, I'm trying to get information out to people so that they can make decisions with better knowledge at their fingertips. And I'm certainly humble enough to know that I know very little in the grand scheme of things, but I can certainly tell when something's wrong, and I can certainly know that information is very important for people to make sound decisions when it comes to deciding what the future holds.
Importantly, also, if I may interrupt, is it's also important to realize that maybe it's okay that people don't get the message. You see, there's another movement of history you alluded to earlier that's key to my work, and it is. And that is that even though I work day and night to, cast the shadows back and to, get this tyranny exposed, however, I also never assume that I am the greatest teacher. Nature, life is the greatest teacher. History is the greatest teacher. And so if people need to go through some sort of, like in America they are now going through some sort of third world scenario where their bones are being picked off by these tyrants, maybe that is exactly what it needs for that true, spirit of rebellion to again reawaken. So we do as much as we can as human beings, but we also must always defer and be humble to this other spirit that acts in the world, always has done in the past, even in the most unlikely situations. And to continue to be optimistic about, the day after tomorrow, when this oppression, because the people that you're dealing with are psychopaths, and they're going to act psychopathically, and they don't have nature on their side, and they don't have rightness on their side, and they don't have morality on their side. And therefore, they're always going to be in direct opposition and antipathy to those who do. And I don't care if those people who are moral come from a Christian background or a Muslim background or a Jewish background or atheists. This is unimportant, which is why a lot of the people in the so-called truth movement don't understand this and are causing untold divisions. I wonder who they may be working for that they're doing this. But it doesn't matter. If you're a person of truth and a person of morality, your background is immaterial. You are already a brother of light. You're already a brother of truth. And you are directly in opposition of tyranny. And therefore, all these petty little differences need to be put aside. And we need to be very stern and very strict with those who keep on trying to manifest these little imbroglios and mucksling around, of which there are many. We need to be very, very intolerant with these people. Like I've always said, have zero tolerance for the lie. Because evil is at the door, and evil is going to destroy all of the people, regardless of what, your sort of background and your class and your creed and your credos and your dogmas are. Fighting evil is an act for and to itself. And later on, we can work out the other details, but we all must agree. And that is why Big Brother has always taken out a person who starts to twig it. Anybody in the public domain who starts to leave their partisan background because they suddenly have woken up. And I would even include people like Malcolm X in this mix, and there's been many others as well. When first they started as a limited, sort of narrow perspective, but as they educated themselves, they got a bigger and bigger vision of what was really going on and start to espy the truth. Well, those people were immediately removed. That's how threatening they are to the establishment, you see. So now if people can do this on a mass level, they can't take you all out. But it means that you must lay down these partisan beliefs to a certain extent and start to understand the pure anatomy of evil and tyranny, which is classless and creedless. Behind the lodge door, these people are laughing that we fall for their stupid, red versus blue, Catholic versus Protestant, atheist versus whatever, Jew versus Muslim. That's all for the street. That's all for the marketplace. And they're having a right laugh about how they've been able to divide and rule us for centuries. It's been sticking in our face for years, and until we've moved past that, and I'm not talking about, we got to have one global something or other. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a rational, healthy realization that your private life and your private world is different than the fight against tyranny, because you need to leave some of these, prejudices at the door in order to step into the movement to be able to fight evil without bringing up all your petty little narrow prejudices and background, baggage with you. It's not going to work. In fact, a lot of that baggage has been manufactured so that you are made apathetic and dysfunctional.
I don't think I could have said that any better myself. It sounds like your personal philosophy is very in tune with my own and exactly the way I try to come across to people and to give that same or very similar message. And as you pointed out, not to be talking about a fancy fantasy world of one world globalization and everybody dancing around in a field together all happy singing la la la. It's definitely much more than that and much less in some ways whenever you break it down. And it becomes rather tedious sometimes to try and explain the distinction to people about what it means to come together in opposition rather than coming together in some sort of utopian new world order type thing that everybody is so worried about.
Well, all my mentors have said this. Both James Bogreitz, that I learned a lot from, said that I'm coming from a Christian world, he said. Another guy is coming from, an atheist world. But I can shake hands with that person if our common goal is the common enemy who's firing at us day and night. That always rang true to me. Then after the main tyranny is over, people can go back to what they, are into on a personal level. There's very little division today between a person's personal life and what they're doing, in the personal life and their public persona. This is a Facebook generation, and it's negative. It's not good. From a purely business point of view, these things are necessary. From a technical point of view, fine. But what it does on a psychological level is allow us spilling over. In fact, one could even say by the introduction of the internet, this has caused this. It's one of the downsides of this, where we have this global, media, but it means that people now just want to spew every little pathetic detail of their lives, and that gets in the way of fighting the greater evil, which is the main cause to bring masses of people together. We're not here, to talk about your cat's broken leg. We're here to talk about, universal evil. So people are using these mediums to just for ego reasons and to just show off their own personal sort of peccadillos and their so-called opinions, and we didn't have that right to do that in public when we were with people who'd been shouted down. If you were an idiot, you'd have been shouted down by your peer groups right there in physical 3D form. But you get on the internet and, everybody's just going to chuckle and listen to what you have to say. But what this does is it creates a lot of noise. And this noise, this static, is what Big Brother is hoping for. That's why they're not that worried, because they know that for every new invention that actually could threaten them, there's also, if they know how to manipulate it correctly, a downside that will, again, the wheel will get stuck in the rut. And that's what the danger is. The danger is not so much the weapons that they throw at us, it's what we ourselves do. The loss of vision, the listening to imbeciles, you see, the wasting of time, the label reading, and ultimately this noise, this static, which is being caused with the cacophony, the parliament of voices, in which the true logic disappears, and then it becomes sort of a hippiedom. It'll be nothing more than the 60s, where everything goes, everybody says everything, and there's no hierarchy of understanding anymore. There's no recognition of who the true thinkers are, and let's listen to these people deeply and let's study what they're doing. It's just, this big cacophony, this big Dionysian cacophony, which is exactly how the so-called movement in the 60s got destroyed. If one analyzes it, you'll see that. And the true voices that were within it never got heard.
Yes, and of course, looking at it from a psychological point of view as well, as you rightly pointed out, people have to be able to put aside their own personal prejudices and the very minor things that come to dominate their lives in various ways, whether it be work, family, the various and multiple things that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And what we end up finding, Michael, is that the people who are in power in the world, they use our own psychology against us by fostering those very types of personal prejudices and keeping people focused on very small and inconsequential issues. And what you've pointed out, in saying about Bogreitz talking about he's a Christian, but he can shake hands with and be united with someone from another faith if they're focused on the enemy. And that's something also that I try to get people to understand in some fashion, that they foster, and I say they, the nebulous they foster the idea that blacks are against whites and that, immigration, people coming from other countries are no good, and that it's about class warfare and it's about racial issues, it's about all of these other things, but that's just being used as a psychological tool against people to keep these groups from coming together to realize that there is a power elite, there is a group in charge that is trying to run an agenda on everybody, and we're all victims of that.
And the real journey starts when you realize that this is the stuff that you've mentioned isn't invented recently in the 20th century. You can actually start to identify this cabal. One of the ways to actually even discover their existence is by looking at how they've done this for centuries, how they've gone in, now a good lot of people who've been awake and understand that very powerful oligarchs and even very powerful wealthy Jews were behind 9/11. We find out that the American government is behind Al-Qaeda and Taliban. You see, these are revolutionary discoveries that many, many centuries ago you would never have had revelations. Now even almost the ordinary Joe knows this, or at least has access to the information that's the case. The same thing goes about, we're making headwards into people have understood that the Trotskys and the Lenins and the creation of the Bolshevik Revolution, why were these guys sent from the Bronx, New York, over to England, over to Russia? You see, so we've got that. We've got that Hitler might have been a British agent. We've got that the Irish conflict, as I said, again, might not be what it appears to be on paper. We've got the fact that the Illuminati, oh no, they're not anti-royalist like all the media says and like most researchers talk about. Or we've discovered that the Egyptian Akhenaten isn't the greatest solar king, the Christ before the Christ, like everybody thought. You see, so we're now in the most incredible era. But what you do is you track back to find out how this divide and rule policy works. And you go back down through history and you find out, the Boer War, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of Nazism. And you start discovering how they use the same pattern, the creation of Israel, the creation of the Zionists. Who are they? Where did they come from? Why is Israel and Jew and Zionist, why are they using terms that never was even used to describe these people before the 1800s? Do we smell a rat there? What's going on? Is this propaganda? And it's the same thing that now the America has to continue this process. Why was the Eastern Europe, not Eastern Europe, the whole of Europe, handed over by the so-called allies to the communists? Well, I thought we were fighting the fascists. We get rid of them, and now we have the whole of Europe divided into the Eastern Bloc. The so-called Cold War begins, and now we have terrorism again. And then we find out that those same terrorists are funded by the same people that are meant to be against them. You see, this is the first time that people now can have an insight where their ludicrous stuff that they've learned from the colleges and the newspapers simply doesn't hold up. And there are so many instances of this. Well, I thought that the Christians were against usury, but we're in bed with the oligarch Jews in America who are running the Federal Reserve and who ran the Ottoman Empire, who run the Moorish Empire, that ran the British Empire, that were always put in charge, not run it. It's the royals that are always at the top. This is another huge mistake that people make. Yeah, Lord Rothschild may be seen sitting beside the Cecil Rhodeses and the Alfred Milners, but he's not giving the rules. He's not giving the orders. They're giving him the orders. And then they say that if you carry these orders out, because they've used the Jews as lackeys for years, these oligarchs. There's people writing book after book after book trying to tell you that these Rothschilds control the Buckingham Palace. Where on earth did you get that idea? It is completely the reverse and always has been, and anyone who tells you different is wrong. And then I thought that Protestant Christian America, on the paper, as everyone will tell you, are meant to be absolutely against usury. Their Jesus Christ was against usury, overthrew the money changers, right? And yet here you have the biggest money changers running the shop. Christians are forbidden to have usury. In fact, I think even Muslims are forbidden to have it. But suddenly you're in bed with those who've made a lifelong historically known as the usurers. How can that be? So there again, we've got a question mark. So it's about looking at all of these question marks and inconsistencies, which is what I have done in my personal life. Right back in day one in Ireland, I was looking at things in a very vague way, I might say, but also wondering, well, wait a minute, all these killings that just happened, these weird ritual murders that happened in the 1970s, these horrible mutilations and killings of these young men. Yeah, like me and all the rest of the community is thinking, when are they going to find this 300 monster, this horrible Bela Lugosi who's stalking the gardens and stalking the parks? And then when you find out, oh no, they've discovered who it was. It's the richest oligarchs in the British government at the time. I believe it was a conservative government. Right. Let me sit around for 10 years trying to explain that now. And then later on you find out that the IRA is created by extremely wealthy oligarchs in the Republic, because the Republic of Ireland isn't just Irish men living there. Some of the most wealthy British Illuminati families have been living there since the time of Queen Elizabeth I, by the way, including the Shaftesburys and the Cecils and the Guinness. The Guinness clan is basically a wing of the Cecil clan, a huge Illuminati family, secret intelligence, British intelligence, owning huge tracts of land there. Yeah, well, these people were being threatened by the official IRA, you see, who was more of a left-wing body, who, working on the principles of people like James Connolly, might have really, really threatened the rich oligarchs. In fact, they were. Not we're going to do it, they were doing it. And therefore, they had to immediately create a faux IRA, a faux Republican movement, to replace that one that was the real danger. And there's one anecdote I'm telling you that you can see across the whole world, the creation of Bolshevism, the creation of Hitlerism, right? The creation of the communists in the Eastern Bloc and even in the Asian theater. It's a constant creation of a faux oppositional body, because to stop authentic revolutionary bodies from rising, which may be working on some very deep and philosophical and meaningful humanitarian processes. They know this happens. They know what happens in South Africa. They know what happens with any oppressed body who's oppressed for too long, then true revolutionaries are going to arise. But then what you've got to do is you've got to assassinate those people, or you at least have to create full orders which they might be stupid enough to join, an order filled with British agents and intelligence officers. And foolishly, these young men go and join these things and talk and speak up and show their passion, only to be later on taken out professionally or even physically, as the case may be. But this is a pattern that these oligarchs have done. So if you know how to look for it, you will see it time and time and time again. And you will start to realize that this whole propagandist thing is exactly what it is. Pure propaganda. One can even look into the history of cinema. How come the entire Jewish moguls run the entire Hollywood situation and all the media in America? Every one of them. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why it is. Because the real media, the real action of using the media for propaganda purposes, was created in Bolshevik Russia, itself controlled by wealthy Jews, and people like Sergei Eisenstein, who knew how to cut the film and use film for propaganda. So you have Trotsky and Lenin on record saying that through the media is the greatest way to mind control the people. The Americans just picked up on that and duplicated it through the moguls, the Jewish moguls of Hollywood. And so today, if you want to understand why America's in the mess it's in, you have to track back through the cinema and go back to the Sergei Eisensteins and the Trotskys and Lenins of Bolshevik Russia and find out who were they. They weren't Russian. They were themselves part of this huge Zionistic movement, trained in New York, brought over at high expense, even the Canadian government refusing to let them through the border because they said these are known terrorists. And then you have a Roosevelt and other presidents saying, no, you let them through. You let them through. So what is this? This is called sabotage at home, is what this is called. This is called having the sheep and wolf clothing right on your doorstep. And so the only way to work it is to discover the ideology, go into study the checks. Where does the money go? Who are these people? How could they possibly get going? And to start listening to these great patriots who've always wrote about that, even during the time that it happened. We have people writing essays and books and warning America while it happened, even people as high up as governors and even, in many cases, even presidents who warned about this, that this overtaking of some very powerful secret societies was on its way. But that didn't stop. You see, the process of takeover is still going on. We may say it now, it takes the front of neocons, or, it changes its face on the surface. But it's the same age-old conspiracy that's been going on now since pretty much the inception of America. And, we can debate about when exactly it happened, what have you, but, it's been going on for as long as America's existed, and it's moving continuously. It hasn't stopped yet, which means the good news is there's still a chance to chop off its head. As big as this thing gets, it can't get bigger than the people. Nothing can. There's always a chance to turn around and chop it off at the root still.
I think it's important for people to be undaunted in their opposition and to move forward with anything positive that they can do. I try to be undaunted, even though I realize that there is a lot of negative pressure against the truth coming out. And I think it's important for people to keep that in mind as well. Michael, we're going to be having a break here in a couple minutes. And I just wanted to point out something very quickly, and that is, you have outlined several different, very important things, and that is the idea of setting up faux opposition groups in order to lure, true revolutionaries into them so that they can cut them off before they get started. And, of course, there are countless examples of this same sort of activity happening here in the United States, where you have the FBI infiltrating radical groups and then inciting people into taking action so that they can then be arrested and called terrorists, when in actual fact they've just been, goaded into doing something that perhaps they wouldn't have done by agents in place and things like this. And, of course, I would say that we probably have England to thank for the type of thing that is done by the FBI, the CIA, and the various other organizations here in the United States, because the British were masters at this for hundreds of years before we came along.
You better believe it.
So, we look back to MI6 and all the other things that they've done in England to realize that there's a great history of this type of infiltration and deception operation going on constantly to try to keep the people in line.
And you have the very Eagleburgers and the Weinbergers and the Kennedys and many others. I have an article called Weapons of Mass Destruction right on my Michael Tsarion page. You click through to the next, and it'll take you to these articles where I even have the quotes from these people, right? Lackeys of the British Crown. And through the Council on Foreign Relations and the Round Table groups and the Royal Institute of International Affairs and so many other groups, this oligarchical power, not the English people, but the British establishment that preys over Britain. Because again, let's always make it very clear again that there is no such thing as a British royal family any more than there was a Dutch royal family or a Belgian royal family. That's just for the punters. These royal families are on to themselves. They're Stuarts, they're Plantagenets, they're Merovingians. The very fact that they happen to be ensconced because of our ignorance in our countries with our flag, at their gates, doesn't mean that they actually are from that country or have actually any allegiance to the countries, that house them. This is the key. That's why they always talk about being the Duke of this and the Earl of that. They're very loath to give their family names because, my God, a lot of people's, hackles would be up. A lot of questions would be asked when you find out, who is this Oldenburg? And who are these Mountbattens? Well, those aren't English names. You see, and then you start, this opens the door to a lot of things. And these people swore the destruction of America years ago. And so these Coit Gilmans and the Skull and Bones people, through these orgs, and even some of your earliest prime ministers and presidents over there, not to mention some of the more shadowy characters in the background whose descendants still exist, they are there for the takedown of America. It is the supreme agenda, and they want to do it in a particular way, because they want to hand over the bones of America to their lackeys, and they want to make sure that America can ever rise, because America is the last hope of freedom in the world. It always was. It was meant to be that. It was founded on that, and it is that. And so I don't look to any other country in the world to have a faintest idea what's going on. It is only in America that this war will be fought to the death. It's still to come. But from day one, they've put in their Roosevelts and their Woodrow Wilsons and their Trumans, you see, and so many people who actually served the Joe Kennedy, all of the Kennedy family, were nothing more than agents of the British Crown, trying their best to do the British agenda, you see, and you have them absolutely infested now in almost all the states as well. It used to be they only had appointments from the federal orgs and maybe an occasional university where their ideologists were working, But now, unfortunately, you have them ensconced in even the local state level as well, because people were asleep in California with affluence and in American affluence in general, and just the historical amnesia. You know, America coming out of the Second World War richer than it went in, so there's a certain amount of affluence that put people asleep. Then, as we spoke about earlier, the media propaganda to lambast and take down those who were speaking the truth. You see this happen, like Senator Joe McCarthy is a name that immediately jumps to mind. Ezra Pound is another, who warned and warned and warned, but then the mainstream, the news oracles wouldn't carry their works, wouldn't publish their books. You see, tried to down them, tried to make them look like idiots. When they were warning about that the Constitution left the door open for the Federalists and the British system to come creeping back in again, which it did through these orgs. And then all these more recent financial crises, like after Iceland, then we had the debacle in America that everybody's trying to find out why did that happen. Well, these are all just symptoms of the pus, the filth that's underneath. The whole system is rotten, and therefore it needs to be risen up. And all these orgs, Council on Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, all of this needs to be thrown out. And nobody, this is another message that's very important as well. Nothing new needs to be invented. I know when people like me speak like this, and others have done it even better than I. But when we speak like this, people have this mist in front of them, this incredible abyss, a frightening abyss. How are we going to do it? What are we going to put in there? How do we put pylons in the ocean? It's terrible. Where can we go? What do you mean, where can we go? The history shows you from Athens onwards. Right? Otto von Bismarck in Germany. We've got the people who've already done it. We only have to read their works and put into play what they have already done. We've got the statesmen. We've got the leaders who've already done it before in times of unbelievable meltdown. We've already got the thinkers. We've already got the economists who can put in new systems right away. We've got the Ayn Rands who spoke about the division between state and economy. That can be done overnight. Where the government bodies, the federal government bodies, do not exist, and they only exist in policing, prosecuting criminals, and defense of the realm. That's it. That's the sole use of government, is defense of the population in case of war, an invasion, which is hardly likely to ever happen. And two, policing in the criminal justice area. But they have no rights in the faith and religion that people believe in. That much, ostensibly, history says has happened. But the thing that has never happened is the division between government and economics. And the moment that that happens, we have civilization full-blown. When you only have state and religion separated, the civilization 20%. You're still not there yet. Because man's daily life is working, not believing. It's working, it's getting out there and producing. It's working in the farms, it's working behind the engines, it's driving the taxis, it's running the shops. So it's the economy that needs to be separated from government. And so America's biggest step forward tomorrow, and this, of course, means a subset of all of this, is the deconstruction of all these federal orgs that are in there policing economics when they shouldn't even be there at all. We don't even need them. And therefore, America has to make a step forward tomorrow to do this, to not only make sure that they go back to the Articles of Confederation or conceive of some other closing, in other words, closing the doors that the Constitution left open. You need to rewrite that, realize how it was written, how the duplicity worked, and making sure we plug it, which there are many scholars. There's Dr. John Coleman. There's great thinkers and scholars alive today who know how to do this. And there's the literature of the great minds of the past who knew how to design cities and to design infrastructure in economics. For instance, 100% no policy to intervene, which was the original constitutional idea. No interference in the life or the politics of the government or the running of any other country. Complete non-intervention. That got sabotaged at the Bretton Woods Agreement and these other agreements put in by these duplicitous people like Roosevelt and so on, you see. So we need a policy of non-intervention. Deal with our problems at home in the United States. Fix that. Get rid of these federal organizations like the IRS and so on. Clean up the inner house, and then, like it used to be, then the world leaders look to America as a model, like the Tsar of Russia once did. Once you have the healthy environment at home, right? Doesn't mean you don't have squabbles. Doesn't mean you don't differences. But you have also a common good to get rid of these ancient evil that is now working through corporate structures, of course, working through the federal orgs. But they can be deconstructed overnight by simple voting, by simple active voting saying, no longer are we going to tolerate this. We can go back to the basics, and we have got great people in even the universities that exist today who've got completely sustainable ways of existing. Iceland was able to do it. Granted, that's a very small example. But that shows you that it can be done. And believe me, they'll never be fooled again. Being once fooled, that country will never succumb again to the world elite. Well, if it can happen there, it can happen again. So we have victories. There's even places in the world where we have victories where this oligarchical force is overthrown, and immediately the country galvanizes back and is stronger than ever. Now, why can't America follow that model as well?
Well, very good and very well said, Michael. We're going to take a break here, but before we go, I just want to and Michael has been very kind to us here in the United States in pointing out the fact that he, having traveled around to many different countries around the world, sees the United States still as a harbinger and a hope for changing the world for the better for all of humanity. And I agree with that assertion to a large degree, primarily because the United States is probably the only country that is still in any form or function that has the power and the inherent will to do such a thing on a global scale, to serve as a outpost and as something for other nations and people to look up to. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be something that's going to happen tomorrow, but it does require people to be very focused on trying to achieve a goal that is better for everybody involved. And while I would be very keen to continue the discussion along the way we have been, I do not want to neglect Michael's latest work, which we did want to discuss here, but we do have a nice segue with this. And that is that we were going to talk about the Female Illuminati, and we did mention the Illuminati a couple times during the course of our discussion earlier. And, of course, one of the key things about the Illuminati is that we have an organization that came and supposedly went in 1776, which is, another one of those so-called accidents of history that it happens to occur in 1776 in combination with the formation of the United States in Bavaria, which is part of Germany. And as Michael pointed out, the royal family in England is not English at all. In fact, they come from Germany, but perhaps their lineage even goes back further. So I would venture to say that if we were to point out any specific female Illuminati, I would venture to say that the Queen of England probably would be one of those members. Is that so, Michael?
Oh, yes, there's no doubt about that. And in fact, when it comes to British queens, she's not the only one, of course. From the time of the Atonist invasion of Britain, this is people who've been following my work on the Irish origins of civilization, know that the people referred to in Irish history as Milesians, I've actually identified as the Atonists, meaning that these were people who, although not originally Egyptian themselves, they did themselves come from the West in very early times, are basically identical with the group that was thrown out of Egypt with Akhenaten. And when these people invaded Britain, they were trying to go back to the ancestral homeland. They weren't the first Egyptians to do so, but they were certainly a malignant group of Egyptians who tried to do so because they weren't coming to share power in Britain. They were coming with express purposes to conquer Ireland and conquer Britain, to take it for themselves. And that is the famous British Empire upon which the sun, right, i.e. Aton, never sets. And the female symbolism has been there from day one. In fact, the very word Europe refers to a female, right? Britain refers to a female. Sweden, the word comes from Svea, which refers to a goddess. So, and in even Ireland, comes from Eri or Ari, which referred originally to a goddess of the earth. That's where we get the word terra from, like terra firma. This is and even the word area, when you say an area of land, meaning an area of her, the goddess, Eri. That's where the word comes from. So this group arrives in Ireland, puts Ireland through the ringer, destroys the Druids, and then we have to understand that once they've set up their dominion, and by the way, the group that I'm talking about isn't as mysterious as people might think when I'm speaking. If people think Knights Templar and Cistercian order, we're talking about the same group. If people talk about Merovingians, we're talking about the same group. It's just a different wing that's not been officially studied too much before. This is the same group, or at least it's the proto-Templars, the people who actually educated the Templars. right? The Templars took their education in everything, not just including world history, but astronomy, occultism, magic. That's why when we see all these occult symbols today, and many of them refer to, they're coming from the Masonic lodges and the Templar lodges. Yes, but where did they learn it? Right? Why is Akhenaten's face right at the top of the Shriner's image, and the Shriner's being one of the most senior of all Masonic bodies in the world? Even the Masonic compass has Akhenaten's face at the top. You see things like that. So when this group took over England, took over Britain, and the Druids was wiped out, these guys didn't just have kings in place down through the centuries, and we're talking perhaps about 500 years BC onwards. Many queens, they're known as the Celtic Queens, including Boadicea, including some of these very famous fiery, warlike beings. So these were the Celtic Queens who were descended from this line. So, and the Queen of England is absolutely one of them. She is coronated on the Stone of Scone, which was originally in Tara. So the very place in Ireland at Tara where these queens and kings of this Atlas dynasty were coronated, she sits on the same St. Edward's throne. It's now called St. Edward's chair. People can look it up, or they can get into my videos and see it all there. And also based on this Celtic sort of paradigm, using the sun, using the pyramid, using the dove, you know, all of this kind of thing. So yes, she would absolutely, along with previous Celtic queens. Now some of them are then, of course, we're talking about those who have been coronated and are officially queens. But we know that many queens who are queen, like Queen Mary, Queen Anne, they don't necessarily need to sit on the throne for very long. We do have the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Victorias, the ones that are more successful and famous. But we have many princesses. We have many dowageresses. Right? Over in France, we have the same story. And then my question has always been, well, yeah, and we also have that, but we also have the mothers and the wives and the sisters of the Godfrey de Bouillons, you know, and the tyrants of the world, the Hugh de Payens and these popes. Aren't they born from a mother? You know, it wasn't Alexander III and wasn't Pope Pius and Gregory VII and all these tyrants. Weren't they born from mothers? What kind of moral sensibility did these mothers, sisters, and wives install in their male children and husbands? Not a lot, if we look at the chronology of history. So why has it been therefore? So my work is merely doing nothing more than saying, can we now bring them into the frame? Can we widen the angle so that we can actually bring into the frame, put on the theater stage here, put in the Mugs Gallery, some of these women? I mean, if you watch the Queen's coronation, you will see that on the balcony, there they are. All the female, no males, just the female, the family dynasty members are presiding over her coronation. Many of the other symbols that are used in the coronation are actually of a feminine, a female point of view. So the group that I'm talking about and looking into uncovering is not a large group. By no means are they large. But power does not need to always be necessarily in the hands of a majority. A very highly empowered, extremely revered group that I now am convinced is the top of the pyramid, that removed capstone. I am more and more starting to realize and think that it is alien. That was number one. This Female Illuminati goes into the alien connection because this is where it started, long before the rise of Egypt or Ireland or whatever. It goes back to prehistoric days. But we can no longer rule out that women, because the book of Enoch and the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus not only mentions Eve and Lilith. I mean, we got a reams of questions just about them alone. But we've got reams of questions then, because remember, those two figures were rescripted from earlier Babylonian Sumerian goddess figures like Astarte and Ishtar and Ashtaroth. So we're already opening up a door. And when you start studying the symbolism that these people used, these goddesses, it was attributed to their temples and to their worship. It's not just the crescent moon, but you have the 8-pointed star and you have the 6-pointed star and what have you, and many other symbols besides. And that's what my work will go into, is a deep look at the symbolism that is used by this group. We start noticing those same images on the Masonic and Templar symbols in the plazas of the world, in the temples of the world, in the universities of the world, on the floor plans of the world. Whole cities are designed. Why don't people go and look at the design of Arlington Cemetery? Why don't they go and look at the design of the Pentagon? Why don't they go and look at the design of the Oval Office? You see, but many people have written on this without the keys of decipherment. A lot of people have exposed some of the stuff we're talking about, but they've done so without the true key of decipherment because they've been fooled, they've been befuddled, and they've been hoodwinked to think that the steering committee, the greatest power of all, is man-made, is a male force, a male oligarchical world order. And that's true to an extent. I'm not ruling that out. My work has obviously been exposing that for years. But as I've been going, I've been building up evidence and evidence and evidence, and this is purely through the etymology and the symbolism. That's what this is all about, because that's where the keys are. It's not from official history that you're going to crack any of this. It is only in the true decipherment of certain symbols and certain etymology, the words, that lead you to the door of this. And by God, it is fascinating. But again, then you step back and say, now let's review some of these things like the Queen's coronation, the history of England, the designs of Philadelphia, Washington, the Washington Monument. Oh, and that thing called the Statue of Liberty. What the hell is that? Everyone's got an idea of which goddess it represents. And so we look at that. Why is she sitting on a gigantic star? What do we got this female thing here for anyway? Why was America born under 4th of July, 1776, a female sign, the female sign of Cancer? Why was the inauguration of the United States of America, the signings of the declarations and what have you, done when the star Sirius, which has always, always, always been related to the goddess Isis, period. And then we find that the second dates, this was brought up by David Overson in his fantastic book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, even though he admits he hasn't the faintest idea why any of this is going on. But his research discovered that the other star that's involved is in Virgo, Spica, in Virgo. Virgo, the most ancient symbol of the goddess, the Virgin Mary, going back to Ishtar again, going back to Isis again, going back to every single goddess of antiquity. And America just happens to be the second, and some people even say the most important occult birthday of America was in the sign of Virgo. Now I got questions about that. What the hell is going on? And then you look around and you see the symbols everywhere. And so, I'm cutting stuff in brief, of course, but we're going to go into an elaborate examination of the existence of this group, whose origin, I believe, started in pre-Diluvian times, during the first alien invasion, when there was a colonization of Atlantis and the rise of civilization, so-called. And the thing that really launched me, the thing that I could never, ever, ever, ever get out, and never can, and I've checked all the translations, I've looked at all of different footnotes, and yet in Genesis, in the book of Jasher, in the book of Baruch, in the apocryphal literature, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and certainly in the book of Enoch, every time it talks about the fallen angels in whatever kind of way that they're portrayed, there are certain nuances, obviously, but in every instance in which they say that these beings took wives from the earth, never once is there a sign or a statement saying, and those women resisted, and those women fought for dear life, and the men rose up of the world to fight the evil ones. A handful of Nephilim can just come here, seize the women of the world, have children by them, and this one little forensic clue. Are we meant to be that dumb? Well, the world basically has ignored this point. But nowhere does it say that there was resistance. Well, then I say then there is room at least, for speculation to say, then could it in fact have been a collusion, a willful collusion? Is that what we're reading here between the lines? I think there's plenty of evidence to portray, especially when mythology is loaded with these femme fatales and what have you, these vampires, and the whole history of the female temptress, from Salome to Lilith to you name it, to Eve. We got a whole bloody chronology. The world of mythology is coming out of the woodwork. The Gorgons, the Pandora. Oh, don't open the box. Oops, she opened it. Well, what is all this? You think guys back in Athens and all our historians just had nothing better to do? Why have they been portraying women in a certain way, a certain kind of female, a goddess, a semi-divine being, who unleashed horrors upon the unsuspecting world? Women who eat their own children, treacherous goddesses who blood-soaked. I want to know what this is all coming from. I'm interested in origins, and I'm not just going to accept the history books. And if we can accept that man is a source of incredible crime, we have to also accept that they have women around them. They were born from mothers. They have wives. What is the role of these people? You can accept that it was a Lucretia Borgia and a Catherine de' Medici or a Queen Christina of Sweden, these horrible monsters, or the Queen Victoria who laid the whole of the world before her feet in a sea of blood, and her insane cousins and nephews going off to the Congo and chopping the hands off women and children, the colonization throughout the world, the subjugation of the United States of America, the involvement in the slave trade. There's women behind this as well as men. How dare we assume that it's only a one-sided thing? And so in this whole concept of the Illuminati, I believe now we need to stop, pause, take a breath, and start reviewing some of the symbolism. Why do the Knights Templar have long hair? Why do they do that? Why, and you go to the headquarters of the Knights Templar in Rome, which is worrisome enough, and walk into the main building there, they have a gigantic painting of the beheading of St. John the Baptist. But behind the esoteric door, they know that the word John does not refer to a male. I give you it in writing. It refers to the Baptist, and down through the centuries, down through the millennia, the Baptist was always female. Jean, G-E-A-N, as the Order of Tsarion give its top member Jean, not John. That's a cover. It's a male cover for a female entity. There she is holding St. John the Baptist's head. All the Christians are looking at poor St. John the Baptist. Oh my God, these holy knights who are worshipping the beheaded John. While the insider smile says, take another look. Yeah, go back to the Leonardo da Vinci paintings and take a look. Take a look at the faces of the Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary. Take a look with educated eyes and see something's going on here. Why does one woman sit in the lap of another? What's that all about? What's all this symbolism? Where does the word Mary even come from? Actually, why are the presidents of America sitting in an Oval Office? Of all the designs in the world, what are they doing sitting in a thing called the Oval Office with the ancient Egyptian symbols above every doorway inside?
Actually, you brought up something quite fascinating, and I think it could be, if in fact you're correct, it could be one of the greatest scams in the history of the world by the promotion of the atheist, largely paternalistic, man-dominated supposed society that we've had throughout the ages, with the so-called suppression of the feminine and the lost feminine principle, and even when you look at secret societies and all of these other orders, religion, of course, all of the major religions are atheist and paternalistic and male-dominated. It's led to the perception that all of the cabal of evil that runs the world and does all of the evil things to keep everybody in check and prevent them from achieving any kind of, spiritual illumination or, betterment of their lives or betterment of humanity in general is all being done by men, or at least 99% of them are. It may
just because it's carried out by men. See, there's a term that the British government used, not the British government, the British royals use a term, I've spoken about it so many times before, called exon. It's actually the same as your gas company over there, E-X-X-O-N. An exon is a messenger of the court, somewhat like a page. A page is the next one down. But the exon is the one who carries out the will of the court. So what we see when we see these orgs that have a masculine persona on front of it, or these Knights Templar, even though they're winking out of the corner of their eye with their long hair and all the other symbolism, like we've just been talking about, the Grail legend and all that stuff, and the serpent symbol. People will see this when I get into this. But the thing is that, although it has the front, those are just exons. They carry out the muscular work, because you don't send armies of women to go and conquer the Congo, because you're going to be wiped out. You don't go and seize Soviet Russia. You don't send armies of women anywhere. So you send armies of men. The muscle is required to go and do the dirty work. But that does not mean that it is ultimately conceived only by men. And that's what I'm trying to get through to people, is that we need to stop and maybe review it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it turns out again that I'm completely wrong, and we're back to where we used to be before. But I believe that in this kind of movement of study, it is always necessary to go back to the mind of the beginner and start looking again. And I believe I've done that, and I believe I can make a very, very strong case for it. We're working on the information now. It should be out in a very short time. And then people can look at my work and they can dismiss it as if they feel like, or they can start again to notice it. What is Columbia Pictures logo all about? Once we decode the symbols. I've often said that many of the symbols that are put in front of us are, based on the zodiac, but people are only familiar with the 12 famous signs. There's 88 other signs up there, many of them to do with the female principle. So a lot of the symbols that surround us, we're not even that, savvy about what they actually mean, not to mention numbers and colors and so many other things. But the time has come now to maybe review this and ask a question. Believe me, this is not exonerating the male. And it's also making sure that I'm not accusing all women. The massacres of the women that you spoke about are of the good girls, the people who had morality, the people who wanted to build civilization and were trying their best to keep the secrets of herbalism and everything else, and who were a proper feminine role, and who in many cases even stood up against this power. But they had to be removed, you see. They had to be taken out because they won't go along with the gig. And so as many males were slaughtered, so this force also rose up against the Wicca, against the ancient shaman. and the wise women, who they knew had to be defeated and got out of the way. So there's been genocides and all that. It's the same message I have the Jews. I'm not against you Jews. I'm against Zionists, and you need to be against them too. Well, there's no difference in that, saying that the Zionists are as much a threat to every average Jew as they are against every Gentile. And the Jews and the Gentiles need to get together to wipe out this pestilence and then start cohabiting side by side in a normal way, worshipping religions as they feel like. That can be handled. But get rid of these secret brotherhoods. It's no different than I'm talking to the women of the world. It is your chance now to get on board this, make a research of your own female these lineage of these very devilish, evil creatures, and dip into the mythology again, not in some new agey goddess way where goddesses dripping with gore are suddenly lionized as being something important. No, I'm not telling you to forget the catalog of male crime against you. But if that male crime against you has a historical precedent, then I'm afraid when you come into the court of law, you have to see the other side of the coin. You can no longer go around just bashing male crime historically, which I'm not saying didn't happen. It did occur. By God, it did. But the thing is that crime creates crime. What would have happened if in prehistoric days, removed from the documents of history, the black pages of the Black Book of History, a crime perpetrated by women was of such horror, such unimaginable horror and cruelty, that it not only gave rise in the mythological and fictional tradition, and even biblical and all these other, as we said, religious traditions of the temptress, but it also left a lingering, shall we say, animosity or dread against the power of the female. And this is where the sorceress idea comes in, because it's not magic, it was misuse of technology. And you only need to watch an old Star Trek to know that. And therefore, I believe that it could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be the idea that a crime of such unimaginable proportions created a dread and then a hostility. Because I do not see any other reason in history for the male hostility against women. But I certainly can see it if you factor in this idea. Then it makes perfect sense. In any court of the law, any female now who is very up on the history of the male crime, and they should be, but they now need to take a next step and question, is that crime itself born out of a hostility of the female because of what womankind had done to her brothers in ancient times? I believe there is enough evidence to at least let us first up periscope and maybe consider this fact, because there's no other reason. Simple Freudian jealousy and what. Men are born of mother. Why would they hate the mother, the womb from which they come? Other theories which I've studied through and through do not fit. They do not fit. They fit to a degree, but they do not answer the absolute crimes that women has sustained under man. And therefore we have to look then, we've got to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you have to be rational. If some answer is not giving it, if you're looking in the official texts, or if you're looking for, you're doing what everyone wants to do. You're doing what is approved. But the answers are not there. Then like any great scholar, you've got to go, I have to dig deeper. Please open another door. Please unchain this book. Open this gate. I'm not getting my answers. And that's what I've done. I'm not satisfied with the answers that are normally handed by people of very, very low understanding of world history. I'm not happy with it. And I believe that I have come upon the answer.
Absolutely, and you have a great catalog. And just once again, I'd like to remind everybody that Michael Tsarion's website is michaeltsarion.com or simply mtsar.com, and there you can get links to all of his material in a vast array of different research that he has done over the years. So I highly recommend it, that everybody go there and check it out. But I wanted to throw a couple things out to you, Michael. First of all, number one, as you pointed out, and the point that I was trying to make, and I think you elaborated on quite well, is that there may be a very strong woman leadership element behind some of the more egregious things that have happened over the course of history, and they have hidden behind the patriarchy that is put out in front as being supposedly the power elite. And it's always to men that everybody looks to as being, oh, that's one of the guys that's in charge, and he's the one that makes the orders. And it may be that there may be very powerful women hiding behind the patriarchy, and it could be a perfect cover for them, and it really makes a lot of sense when you think about it. The other thing is England itself, okay, Great Britain, seems to be a kind of anomaly in a certain sense, to me anyway, and maybe you've found something different, but during the course of its history, it has had a significant number of women monarchs, as opposed to most other royalty around the world, who seem to have largely been male-dominated. And I wondered if you thought that England itself had some kind of special place in this whole scheme.
Oh, undoubtedly. And again, the history of that is in the prehistoric times. The history of England is not starting in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. It goes back 1,000 years BC with the overtaking of these Egyptians. And by the way, the Irish and Scottish chronicles tell you about it. Their dates are off, but that's, again, propagandist, because who wrote those was the monks. But there are many other sources that clearly tell you, no doubt about it, that Scotland and Ireland, before Scotland, was named after Akhenaten's daughter, Scotia. Her name was S-C-O-T-A or S-C-O-T-I-A, Scotia. And that was a name that actually just simply meant that she was of the Scythians. She was a Scythian. This is a very important group of people that I write about in the Irish Origins book in my work. A very ancient group of wizards and warlocks, very powerful people. They gave rise to many of the dynasties. They're very similar to the Phoenicians in one sense. But one group of them was corrupt. This is a group that ended up in Egypt and then, as I say, made their way back. And most of the Bible is the telling, especially the Old Testament, is the actual telling of that tale, but in extremely cryptic language. You have to know how to decode the Old Testament, because that's what the story is really about, is this group and its events and its actions, which has been allegoricized into all of this movement of the races and what have you, the movement of the chosen ones and the chosen people and all of this, the Moses story and all the rest of it. And even, in fact, the Garden of Eden story, again, is very much part of this. This is actually an Egyptian, Sumerian, Babylonian tale. But then you come to England, and then that's where this group took over England, as I say, from about 1000 BC. But it took them time, of course, to destroy the Druids. It took time for them to actually seize the real power, both in a physical, they wanted the minerals, they wanted the land, and they had a lot of work to do to suppress the previous hegemony that existed there, which was a very pure and powerful one, but it stood in opposition to them, you see. So the story of the coming of the Atenists is an immediate one of war, because they found that the people in Ireland were against them. And so they had bloody war there. And this is included the genocide of the Druids with the help of the Romans. The Romans didn't come autonomously. The Romans were mercenaries. This is another detail of history that has never been brought up before properly, because we're knee-deep in liars from these official orgs, you see. But the Greeks, Alexander the Great was a psychopath. He was used previously to destroy Egypt by the same Atenist group who had ensconced themselves in Greece, and they used him and his groups, power-mad, power-hungry lunatics, to go in and destroy Egypt, because they've had a vendetta, being thrown out of Egypt, of course you can imagine they had a vendetta against the Egyptian country, and they still do. And then later on, the hardcore group arrived in Britain, were successful, did take over, and have been in power there ever since. And so the certain kind of women, and as I say, it's ludicrous to think of them as an English or British monarchy or German monarchy. This is an alien monarchy. They sit in a country, those countries themselves, the names are brand new. You know, I mean, there wasn't even a Germany before the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't even such a term. Britain has largely been divided umpteen times. The Danish did it, you know, and the Anglo-Saxons and so on. So even these ludicrous terms, that's why I'm into the etymology, because in front of all reality is words. There's a word for everything we have in reality. And if you can deceive people on the words that they use, which describes reality, you are actually then skewing and distorting reality. So one of the greatest attacks on us is the very words that we use. Oh, today the president from the Oval Office said we're going to declare war, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Are we listening? Are we decoding? No, we're not. He's pushing the pen. He sits behind the table. He grins in the camera while he sits inside the female symbol. I'm interested in where they're shaking hands. I'm interested in when they go to these places and why they're doing things here, there, and everywhere. I'm interested in the symbolism they're using. I'm interested why there's a fasci, which is nothing but a bunch of birch rods, a tree of life symbol, and why that symbol is ubiquitous throughout the world. Where does the skull and bone symbol really come from? See, all of these kinds of emblems that we see all over the frickin' place. These are obelisks. So the towers, right, the corporate towers are obelisks. Inside sits the worker ants. But city, those are the halls Hall is the word phallus, but a phallus sits inside the cetus, C-T-E-I-S, which means the womb, the female womb. All the phallic towers, City Hall, sits inside the womb of the female. The very word city represents that. The very word cross, Christians are all worshiping their cross, comes from the word keras or kerastes, meaning serpent. And long before modern times, everyone in the ancient world knew that the cross and the serpent are identical symbols. One is in the place of the other. It's only modern Christians who don't know this. They don't know that their God is the Lucifer, the Aton of the ancient world, talking about devils and Lucifer. They're worshiping it. The mind control is so wall-to-wall, it's unbelievable. But you decode it through the symbols and through the etymology. The serpent cross. What on earth is all of this? And so you find out that, yes, indeed, secretively there, beside all the great oligarchs and the figures of history, from the Medicis onwards, through every tyrant, for the Merovingians, who are basically in control of England. They were sent out to, colonize France. The Merovingians have a large dynasty all over the place. But this group and there's an Eastern side of it as well. How many people know about the Eastern Illuminati and the Muslim Brotherhood and the crypto-Jews of the Turkish Ottoman Empire? Everyone thinks the Illuminati is some phenomenon of the West. For thousands upon thousands of years. Coming out of Egypt again. Now, the origin is the same, but the cult of Mithras, the cult of Sol Invictus, and many other more sinister groups, the group I largely call the Cult of Dionysus. That's just a brush term, a broad term, to cover all of these people. Who are the Eleusinian rites? Why do they grab a male and tear him to pieces? The god Dionysus being torn to pieces by a group of mad women, the Bacchanalias. You think it's any different today? You only got to turn on the TV and watch this rubbish that they're showing from the pop icons of the Rihannas and the Lady Gagas and the Madonnas to say, I recognize that. That's not new. But why is it that women are doing it? Why are they in charge of it? I thought women were meant to be the moral voice, the moral conscience of our society. Here they are knee-deep in blood and debauchery and God knows what, necrophilia and child abduction. There's symbolism being used all around us. A certain kind of symbolism that does not originate in the male world. Yes, the solar cult may be in front of us, Sol Invictus, as I say, using the symbol of the sun. But always around those symbols, you keep seeing the star. You keep seeing the crescent moon. And one other symbol that I'll be largely going into, the main project, the DVD we're doing, is to examine one important symbol that I think opens the door to the whole thing. It's a well-known symbol, actually. I'm not going to mention it right now, but it's a well-known symbol, and everyone recognizes it. And yet, all the time, it's been in plain sight. And that symbol opens the door, the golden doors of truth, into who has really been running the shop. Because I'm interested in what these checkerboards mean, you see, and all of this crazy symbolism. What does it represent? But in England, you're absolutely right. There, it's a special purpose. Queen Victoria is a very important figure. There's many other dowagers and lesser-known people in and around her that then went on to spawn the nobles of other countries, especially the Dukes of Belgium and what have you, the King of Belgium, Leopold II, and many, many others. You've got Queen Christina of Sweden, a very, very fascinating and sinister character. You've got the Lucretia Borgias. You see, you have a large group of people. Large enough, and it's even modern. I have a forum, the Female Illuminati forum. People are sending me stuff. Everything they send me merely corroborates what I'm thinking. I only started off. They're sending me stuff of modern potentates today, female potentates, who've got very interesting histories. So let's not forget the Madeleine Albrights. Who are they? Who are these Condoleezza Rices? Why did she not bow to the Queen when she walked in and they met at Buckingham Palace? I'm interested in that. What's going on? You see, there's they give it away in their symbolism. They give it away in their symbolism, but they know that most of the world cannot decipher it correctly, or they do it very superficially. Or again, they're not willing to make that next step. They observe, but they do not see. They're not able to deduce from the observations that they make. So I think that most of the stuff I would talk about is in plain sight, you see. The Statue of Liberty, the Columbia Pictures, the Oval Office, the Star Sirius on every Masonic diadem, the very dates in which certain events took place, like the moon landing and what have you, and what does even the moon symbolize, you see. So it's all there. If I was to say a lot of stuff, people would get it, like most of the continents of the world are named after women. So they would see it. But they're unable to deduce it until somebody brings all the symbols together in one presentation. This is what I've traditionally done with my symbolism work. It's only when you bring it all together that people go, my God, there are connections. I've been looking at it all the time. I never saw it. Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up in relation to that, Michael, is the fact that some very good research that has looked into very ancient societies that were supposedly matriarchal societies that were run by women quite openly. And it seems that some of that research has shown that the ancient matriarchies actually were quite bloody and violent in their operation. And this kind of thing is really not talked about a lot from a psychological point of view and from the point of view of where women supposedly stand in our society today.
That's exactly right. I'm glad you brought that up. The man who actually discovered this, it was his lifelong study, was the anthropologist, scientist called J.J. Bachofen. This is what people need to look this name up. J.J. Bachofen, B-A-C-O-F-E-N, and then try to find me any of his books in translation in English. His work was suppressed. It's because he, in fact, was the pioneer. A few others, like Maria Gimbutas, took it off later on, but even then it flagged. And then the last thing that you have is Joseph Campbell, the famous American scholar, making brief allusions to it, nothing in depth, although he refers to J.J. Bachofen's work and also laments that the work is not properly translated. So in the case of those who've really cracked any type of historical code or symbolic code, like the Swallowdalubiches or the J.J. Bachofens, you will find that their work doesn't get any credence and is hardly known to the world. Yet, people from their own universities, contemporaries who wrote a lot of rubbish that the establishment thought, yeah, this is wonderful, they're now household names and taught to every school child. So this is, of course, a problem that when you start studying those people who looked into the matriarchy, whether it was of the Amazons or Lesbos or whoever, whatever group, or even, as you say, the matriarchal age. And remember, we're not talking about that any patriarchal age is necessarily idyllic, nor are we going to say that any matriarchal organization epoch is idyllic. They have, every age is fraught with war and bloodshed and what have you. But it certainly helps to study the matriarchal age because it will disavow people of any illusions that they have regarding the ferocity of the female, and just simply going into mythology alone leaves an objective student, you see, wondering what is really going on here, and why it is that in one sense we can think of ancient goddesses as being the keepers of light and being great mothers, the Isis, the loving mothers like the Hathors, but then we read about the dark side of these goddesses and how ferocious it was, particularly goddesses like Sekhmet. But all of them, even Hathor, even Isis, have a dark side, a potentially even evil side. And then the arising of the whole question of the lunar cult and their worship of the number 13. Incidentally, there's 13 levels of the famous pyramid. 13 is all over the dollar bill. As I said, we know, don't we, that so many people have delved into this. We have so many people in the conspiracy movement who have analyzed the number 13 involving itself in the appearing on the dollar bill, including the 13 material layers of the pyramid, the 14th being a sort of a two-dimensional, almost immaterial capstone. But how many people who have gone into great depth talking about that mention that it's a lunar number? It takes 13 months for the moon to go through the zodiac, 12 of the famous months that make the year. That's the sun's transit. But the moon takes a little bit longer. So from time immemorial, both the monthly passage of the moon has been always 13 phases, halfway through the year, halfway through the month. And then also 13 is the famous number of the lunar cult. Mary Magdalene was the 13th disciple. So everywhere you look at the 13, even in official Catholic iconography, you will find that it refers to the female. So then I want to know, why did the founding fathers, or whoever brought this pyramid symbol, and the eagle with its 13 leaves, 13 berries, 13 clouds, 13 letters in the whatever, the Great Seal or whatever it might be. I'm wondering then why it wasn't 14, 15, 16, 12, 11, 10. Why this famous female number? And in fact, then you find out that before they were going to use the eagle, they were going to use the vulture. And then even before that, the phoenix. The phoenix is a female symbol. It's always been used as a female symbol. So is the pelican. So is the vulture. The vulture is one of the most ancient symbols of the goddess Mut, going back to Egypt thousands of years before. So every time you turn around and look at the real occult symbolism, you keep seeing this crossover into the female symbolism. But then they put the sun in the front and talk about, the solar cult and the males and the Akhenaten's and stuff. And of course that does the trick. We don't look any deeper. We don't look into who Nefertiti was and where she ended up. We don't check, into the story of the famous figures of history. We again do this thing that every cop is likely to do. Oh, it's a chick. Okay, here you go. Drive on. Have a nice day. I mean, there's something about our psyche, partly out of virtue, understandably. But whenever there's a female crime, we are always trying to find excuses. We're always trying to find exonerating circumstances, mitigating circumstances. And I think that, that's all right when it's giving out parking tickets. As John Wayne once said, I can always forgive a woman one murder. Great joke.
Yeah.
But I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the malls and sort of that type of level. I'm not talking about your Eileen Warnosses. I'm talking about your Circes, your Pandoras, and some very heavy-duty stuff going all the way back. I want to know why the Genesis story got created. Why are they saying that a woman was cause of the fall? Maybe she's not. In my first book, I took up the idea that is a complete and utter distortion of the facts, and that, in fact, the Lady Eve, one very powerful interpretation, is that she was disobedient towards the Atlanteans and led man, Adam, to safety, led him to his freedom, led him to his enlightenment, and that the serpent was nothing more than a code word for the great scientists of the Nephilim who, having a schism between themselves, fell out, and then you have a description of the division into what I call the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, and the women being very important, a group of women anyway, being very important in making sure that a great deal of their fellows were saved and moved to the continent of Lemuria, which even means the motherland of humanity, the land of the immortal serpents, known down through all of Eastern iconography and history to be Mahadevi, right, the land of the goddess in which civilization was created. So we have a huge faction of women who decided to not go along with the alien agenda and to serve their brothers. And we have these women talked about very heavily in the Celtic and the Irish legends, Celtic and pre-Celtic, very much so. We have these women, these priestesses, servants of their tribe, servants of their people, custodians of freedom, custodians of, and vigilant warrior queens, right? We have them mentioned in the Edda, the Norse Edda. We have them mentioned in the Mahabharata. And how they even trained their children, how they even brought up their kids, trained their children to be champions of their people. So I'm not in any sense of the word a misogynist who's sort of implicating all women in some sort of hideous conspiracy against mankind. Never will I allow anyone to be so crude as to try and silence me with that old one. That's a dead horse. We're looking in the occult, not official histories of the world. And this is, like I say to Jews, you better learn about the Zionist conspiracy in your midst. So I say to women, you better wake up and assist in this process. You better do your homework. Find out that there's been some evil going on. Don't just use the old standard, look at the evil males. You may be committing a moral crime by doing that. You may be creating a historical model. You may be making a deep affront to truth by constantly blaming men for the crimes that have been done towards you. What happens if there's something more sinister? It's like I said in another interview, we're facing on the battlements of the castle when all along up on the hill, right, in their pavilions on their horseback, watching the whole drama, just like I said, those aliens watching Captain Kirk doing his little dance, having his little romances and trying to save the world. And all the time he's following out their greater plan. So it is, there's a higher force. This 14th level of the pyramid, this immaterial level of the pyramid is not even earthly. It's not even something that thinks in a three-dimensional way. It's something infinitely more sinister. And this is our perfect time for us now to start getting an insight into how it works.
Yes, I think so. And I think you brought up so many great points that people can research and look into. And, of course, also with a great deal of looking forward to your work on the Female Illuminati, because the fact that we've seen in our society in particular, but everywhere around the world, there also seems to be a certain, psychological condition placed on women to a certain extent where they are seen as the quote-unquote fairer sex, and that they occupy a certain psychological position and role and what have you. And I think that it's very important that we could also look at the research that you're doing into the female that may be behind some of the ruling classes and the people running the show, that could also be behind a lot of the negative pressure that's placed on women and the negative psychological drama that goes into women's lives. And that can be used as a powerful tool to help women as well. And it could be a positive thing, the type of research you're looking into, in helping women today realize that a lot of things that they are struggling under from a psychological point of view may ultimately come from something that has been done against them, and
That's
that
right.
they may be able to work that out in some fashion by coming to terms with that and realizing that it's not a natural state for them to be in, i.e. powerless or being in relationships with men who abuse them and things of this nature, which seem to be so very common, in our society, that they may be put into those positions because of pressures from outside that have so ingrained themselves in our culture just by the rulers, the people behind the scene, the Illuminati, if you want to call them that are behind the scenes, who are driving history and the driving force behind world events and culture and the formation of states and all of that. And it may be a very powerful force for good as well. And one thing, too, that you brought up, which is a very important point for people to keep in mind, and that is the fact that there seems to be this sense of people having blinders on when it comes to looking at issues like this. When you see so many researchers who get involved in the study of alternative history and the type of things that you study, Michael, and that you have brought forward in all of your great works, there are very little women involved in this field. That's one thing. The second thing is that there seems to be little emphasis being placed in any sense on women by people within this research community. And the other thing is that the blinders keep that aspect out, but also there is this idea that everything is in the West. It's all Western. There's nothing, the East might as well not even exist as far as any of this research goes, because people don't even spend the time to look into the ancient history of the East, into ancient China and India and the whole of Southeast Asia, the whole of Russia, even, for that matter. There's so much there that needs to be looked into, that needs to be brought to light to understand this whole phenomenon on a global scale. We can't just be limited in looking here in the West and think that all the answers are going to be found there.
Or even looking at a thing out of fear. People now have been forced, not because they want to. Part of that blinkers you're talking about is because people only even start to even look at this information, not because they want to, but because they have to. If the world that they're living in doesn't make sense anymore, and this conspiracy stuff is now on the table, so they go and browse it, they learn a few lines, they read some labels, but they're not in love with the facts, they're not in love with truth. All they want to spend their time is debunking those people who are doing this arduous work. But when it comes to America, you see, America is a study in itself. In a way, you can say, okay, say somebody doesn't want to study the other parts of the world, or the histories of other lands, then the study of America alone, when it's just done from the right point of view, though, it opens a lot of doors, especially if you're into the occult stuff, like the symbolism and the etymology and some of the other interesting, fascinating points. Wasn't there originally 13 states in America, I think, in the very beginning?
Yes.
Yeah. See things like that.
And of course, on the top of the Capitol as well is another very famous statue that no one really talks about very much, and that's Minerva, who is on top of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. There's all kinds of incredibly profound feminine symbolism within Washington, D.C., but this, of course, goes all across the country as well. So that's
a good point you made. I forgot about that one. That's right. It's either Persephone and there's Minerva. And Minerva, of course, is what? The Illuminati highest degree is Minerva. Minerva and the owl. The owl on the dollar bill, the little microscopic owl, that is the goddess Minerva that's worshipped at the Bohemian Grove. So there's an anecdote we were alluding to before. Everywhere you turn, you just keep running into this female symbolism. That people talk about the owl this, the owl that. Yeah, but what is the owl a symbol of? It's the symbol of the goddess Minerva. She was known as Sulis in the Anglo-Saxon in Britain, right? That turns up in movies. Then we find out that this Minerva was literally one of the highest degrees of the Bavarian Illuminati. The tutelary symbol of the Illuminati was a female goddess. Hello.
Absolutely. And when you look at, even when you look at religion, when you look at the foundation of any of the patriarchal, either religions or politics, whatever, there is always a feminine representation somewhere to be found. In secret societies, as you pointed out quite rightly, in all the lodges of Freemasonry, in all of these secret societies, there are always very prominent feminine symbolism. And I'd say it would probably be impossible for you to find a strictly Athenist, total patriarchy society anywhere that is devoid of this, because it has penetrated itself into every area. And that's well, I was just going to say, that's another thing that supports your contention, I think.
Yes, and don't we know that even one symbol I used to notice a lot was the symbol of the black sun?
Yes.
Like the nighttime sun. I mean, are these guys Athenists or are they not? This used to confuse me. So why are they using this black sun now? All makes sense when you understand that behind every light is the hidden light, right? They even call it in Freemasonry the lost light. And what does light do? It blinds us. So when you put the male in front, when you put the male god in front, you have got people bamboozled and bright. That's why the pyramid, the top of it, is beaming with light. All their symbols have light emanating. We all go, oh, that's really holy. That's like a halo. No, that is mind control. That is you being, your eyes burned out. That's you being frazzled. That's being you bedazzled, which is what Lucifer does. That's what Aton is all about. So you can't see the truth. They don't hide the truth. They just blind you. And you can't see them. They're hidden behind the bright light, as any burglar, any thief, any smart, cunning adversary knows how to do. If you darken somebody, your eyes will get used to it. But if you keep flashing bright light in their eyes, well, then you're constantly in a state of blindness. And that's how they work psychologically. And this black light, or this lost light, the sisterhood, as I now refer to it, I believe is behind that. And the fact that it happens to be, somewhat controversial because you're talking about, it could be a female, to me is largely, immaterial. I'm just interested in discovering tyranny. I don't care if it has a male face or a female face. That is secondary to me. I'm not chasing the controversy like some, cheap journalist trying to write a book and, and sort of get this fame that he's talking about the women control the world crap. To me, this is not something that's, is going to be of interest to the mainstream media or anything like that. I am not interested. I'm looking for a criminal. I'm looking for a criminal syndicate, a very ancient and powerful one that's been that operates, as I've said so many times in my work before, on a psychic level. And I'm interested to know where that trail leads. And so much of the symbolism, even the symbolism of going through the labyrinth in order to find enlightenment, the labyrinth is nothing more than a female symbol of the womb, Ariadne's thread, right? The whole womb symbol of the maze, even the word maze, and labyrinth comes from labres, the organs of the female womb, right? There's so many symbols of the axe. You see the fasciae. Yeah, but the axe used to be a double-bladed axe. The name of it I actually forget right now, but that was actually another symbol of the labia. That was another symbol of the female. Right? So everywhere you turn, what appears to be a male symbol, and this includes numbers and the pentagram and what have you, and in many instances even refers to the sun. They even sometimes refer to the sun as the black sun. In fact, even the astrological symbol for a sun is a circle with a dot in the middle. That's like a female breast. You see, so when you take off the blinkers and you really see with clarity, you start seeing that there is something going on here. There's something unusual going in here. The female box, Pandora's box. The lion and the lady and the lion, which is the Britannia symbolism, and all the rest of it. Why is the Queen of England given an emerald and a sapphire? Blue and I think it's a ruby and a sapphire. So it's blue and red, the colors you see on the American flag. and on the British heraldry, the red, white, and blue. Where do those symbols come from? Why are they so sacred? Why wasn't an emerald involved or a diamond? Why only these two colors? Why are they on the British flag? You know, what's all the symbolism about? Why are all the Celtic kings buried in a mound which represented the womb or the breast of the mother? Why are all the Egyptian sarcophaguses showing the goddess Nuth inside? So when you lay the lid over a dead body, a mummy, it was the mother goddess. So we have both a very positive stereotype, or it's not stereotype, but archetype of the female being the virgin mother, the nurturer. And at the other side, it's not Michael Thorne dreaming it up. This is mythology. This is history, telling you that you have the dark side of the female, the dark, sinister, malicious, treacherous side. This now needs to be addressed in a new way. And if it is in fact that treacherous and that sinister, then how come it could not be in control of the world order? Especially when now hasn't it even been revealed quite recently by certain scholars that the very EU flag of those 12 stars is known to be the 12 stars above the head of Mother Mary? They've meant that, not me, but they've mentioned this so many times. This is people who are not even remotely interested in the occult history of anything, but they've even deduced that this is a Vatican symbol of the Virgin Mary and the 12 stars there. Well, you got something very similar on the American dollar bill, and yes, it does represent the Virgin Mary. You're damn right. But who does she represent? Who does she come from? What's the Statue of Liberty? What are those thorns in her? What's that crown of 7? Who does that relate to? A goddess? If so, whom? Yes. And if so, why? Why are the Nine Sisters Lodge, Grand Orient Freemasonry, which Benjamin Franklin and the Lafayette, Marquis de Lafayette, are all members of these French Grand Orient lodges. One of them called Nine Sisters Lodge, and these are the very people donating to America the Statue of Liberty.
Yes, unfortunately, Michael, we're flat out of time. I wish we could continue, but we're just completely out of time. So would you tell us very quickly when we can expect the Female Illuminati to be available?
Not too long now. I do things in my own time and make sure it's done right. Laying it out now. I've been working on it for a long time, but it's now about galvanizing the main points because we don't want to get into too many highways and byways. Want to make it as sharp and clear and concise as possible. So there's a lot of arrangement going into this, and I want to do it as well as I possibly can. There's other projects ongoing as well. So I will be giving updates to people. We have a femaleilluminatiforum.com, so people can go on there, or just go straight to femaleilluminati.com and you'll see the links. And people can stay in contact with us about this. They're welcome to send us any information, and certainly I'll be giving updates as we go. Be glad to come back on you guys' show and let you know about it when we actually have the DVD out, you know.
Okay. Wonderful, Michael. Thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate you spending time.